Hello, art students. This is Sarah Farrington. If you have not seen my other studio tour videos, you might want to check those out. This one's going to be all about armatures, the history of armatures, how artists use them, how I use them in my sculptures. I hope through this video you'll learn a little bit more about how I create the sculptures I use in my sculptural installations. I hope that you learn a lot and I hope that you enjoy it. An armature is the skeleton or framework that gives support to something else. The armature provides structure and stability. Armatures are often used in sculptures and stop-motion puppets. Armatures can be made of many materials, often wood or metal. Early sculptures of human figures needed support. Internal armatures weren't being used yet. So to stabilize a sculpture, artists had the figure sitting or leaning against something to keep the figure stable. During the Renaissance, artists got more creative with how they support their sculptures. They began using internal armatures instead of having their figures leaning against something. This allowed their sculptures to have more visual movement and to be less clunky than before. One example is Verrocchio's Pudo poised on a globe, which museum conservators and scientists x-rayed to see the inside of the sculpture. The armature is made of malleable iron rods, nails, and twisted wires. The armature is a very important part of a sculpture. It needs to be strong enough to hold whatever the outer material will be. Without a strong armature, the sculpture may fall apart. If the armature is being used to support a wet material like clay or plaster, the armature needs to be resistant to moisture. Sometimes an armature isn't meant to stay inside the sculpture. Like with clay, an armature can be removed before firing. When the human figure is sculpted, the armature acts as the skeleton of the figure and has the same purpose of keeping the figure stable and upright. This can easily be seen in the armatures in puppets for stop-motion animation. It is important that the arms, legs, neck, head, etc. can move on these puppets, just as humans can. Very large structures need a very strong armature. These are typically made from lead pipe, iron rods, wood, or maybe a combination of similar materials. A very large example is the iron armature inside the Statue of Liberty. If you stand at the base, you can see the steel armature holding the bronze sheeting in place. Contemporary Spanish artist Manolo Garcia creates very large replicas of Renaissance-era sculptures, portraits, animals, and other decorative objects in his workshop in Spain. Most of his sculptures start with strips of wood that are added to large armatures. The objects are usually so large that they are first built in pieces and assembled wherever the work will be displayed. Contemporary artist Beth Cavanier creates animal forms that look suspended in action. To create her clay sculptures, she starts by making maquettes, which are small examples of what the sculpture will look like. She takes a photo of the maquette and enlarges it to start designing the armature. First with tape on the photo, then uses pipes and wooden dowels to build the armature. Each joint of the armature can still move as she's building her sculpture with clay. That way she can move things around as needed before she fires the clay so that it is hardened and finished. With the sculptures I make, some pieces need an armature, while others do not. Whether a sculpture needs an armature depends on how large it is and whether it will need to hold other objects. None of the sculptures or armatures I make are built to hold a human body, but they do need to be strong enough to stay together. I start creating armatures by drawing. I determine what the dimensions of the finished piece should be based on the dimensions of real furniture. Dimensions means the measurement of the height, width, and depth. I often look at furniture online to find pieces that are on trend for visual inspiration. Once I have a plan for dimensions, I begin thinking about how each piece of the sculpture will fit together. An important part of my larger pieces is having them break apart into smaller pieces, so I can transport an entire room of sculptures in a vehicle to a gallery or museum. So I have to build in ways to join the cardboard pieces together. I often use something similar to the carpentry joint called mortise and tenon. Once I have a plan, I begin measuring and drawing the needed pieces on sheets and scraps of cardboard. Then the pieces are cut out and put together with adhesive. Adhesives are substances that stick things together, like glue, tape, or staples. To adhere one piece of cardboard to another, I often use tabs. Tabs are small pieces of cardboard folded to a 90-degree angle and glued to both pieces of cardboard that I'm joining. I also use tape in addition to glue. The tape helps secure and clean up edges. While creating the armature, I have to test whether the pieces will actually join together. If something isn't working properly, then I have to problem solve how to fix it. Sometimes I have to test how the sculpture is fitting together to know what to do next in the armature making process. For some sculptures, I have to focus on balance. A good example for that are lamps. The lamps I made needed to have enough structure to hold up the lampshade, which I made lightweight out of cardboard, but was still a little too heavy. There was a fine balance between lightweight and strong. Many of the lamp pieces are small, and I have to be very careful when working on them. Creating the lamps also meant that I had to test to see how it was working very often. The armature is just the first step of the process when creating my sculptures. I'll talk more about how I add paper to armatures in a future video. But here is a quick time lapse adding paper to the end table armature components before it's all assembled. Here you can see how the pieces of the chair and end tables fit together. They started with an armature, then paper, and then now they can be assembled. Thank you so much for joining me today for this video. I hope that you'll join me for next week's video. Bye!